Once upon a time, in a bustling town called River Spring, there lived a beautiful and hard-working young lady named Grace. Grace had a heart as pure as gold and a smile that could light up any room. She worked as a tailor, sewing beautiful clothes for her customers. Grace dreamed of finding a kind and loving man to marry, someone who would cherish her and share in her dreams. One sunny afternoon, while Grace was at her shop, a handsome man named Philip walked in. He was tall, charming, and dressed in a sharp suit that looked expensive. Philip said he needed a new shirt for a party, and Grace quickly measured him, her cheeks turning pink as he complimented her work. Over time, Philip kept visiting Grace's shop, bringing her small gifts like flowers and chocolates. He would tell her stories about his travelings and how successful he was as a businessman. Grace was impressed. "This is the man I have been praying for," she thought. "Philip seems perfect, kind, generous, and successful." After a few months of courting, Philip proposed to Grace in the most romantic way. He knelt down in the middle of her shop, holding a beautiful ring, and asked her to be his wife. Grace was overjoyed and said yes without hesitation. Their wedding was simple but beautiful. Grace wore a gown she had sewn herself, and everyone admired her talent. However, something odd happened at the reception. When it was time to pay the caterer, Philip whispered to Grace, "Do you have any money on you? I forgot to bring cash." Grace was confused but didn't want to make a scene. She used her savings to settle the bill, thinking it was just a one-time mistake. After the wedding, Grace moved into Philip's house. It was a large, beautiful home, but she quickly noticed something strange. Philip always avoided talking about money. If Grace needed grocery, he would say, "You are so good at managing money. You should handle it." If a bill needed to be paid, Philip would come up with an excuse like, "Oh, I forgot my wallet at work." Grace began to feel frustrated. She worked hard every day, but instead of saving for her dreams, she was spending all her money on the household. One day, Grace decided to confront Philip. "Philip," she began, her voice shaking, "why do I have to pay for everything? Don't you care about our future together?" Philip smiled, but his words stunned. "Grace, you are such an independent woman. Isn't it better this way? Why should I waste my money when you are perfectly capable?" Grace was shocked. She realized that Philip wasn't just forgettable. He was stingy. He had fooled her into thinking he was generous, but in reality, he never wanted to spend his money, not even on her. Grace sat in her sewing room that evening, tears in her eyes. She thought about how happy she had been before she met Philip. She thought about her dreams and how she had put them aside for a man who didn't value her efforts. Grace spent the night crying, feeling so sad. The more she thought about Philip's words, the more determined she became. She couldn't continue living this way, but she also didn't want to make any rash decisions. She decided to take her time and think of a plan. The next morning, Grace put on her best dress and headed to her sewing shop. As she walked, she chatted with her best friend, Linda, who had stopped by to visit. Linda was a spirited young woman, always full of advice and energy. Grace poured out her heart to Linda, telling her everything about Philip's stinginess. Linda listened carefully and said, Grace, you are one of the smartest people I know. Linda said finally, you have built this business with your own hands. If Philip can't see your worth, then maybe it's time you reminded him of it. Grace nodded, feeling a spark of hope. But how do I do that? Linda leaned closer, her eyes twinkling. You don't have to argue or fight. Just focus on yourself. Save your money. Invest in your business and make sure you are in control of your future. Let Philip see that you are not someone he can take for granted. Grace smiled. Linda was right. Instead of dwelling in Philip's behavior, she would focus on building herself up. Over the next few weeks, Grace threw herself into her work. She started taking on more clients and even began teaching sewing classes to young girls in the neighborhood. Her shop became busier than ever and her bank account started to grow. Meanwhile, Philip began to notice the changes. He noticed how Grace carried herself with confidence and how her shop was thriving. He also noticed that she no longer asked him for anything. If a bill came up, she would handle it silently without even mentioning it to him. One evening, as they sat down in dinner, Philip spoke up. Grace, I have noticed you have been very busy lately. You are doing well for yourself. Grace smiled politely. Thank you, Philip. Hard work pays off. Philip cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. I have been thinking maybe we should start planning for the future. You know, saving for bigger things together. Grace looked at him, surprised. Together? She repeated. Philip nodded. Yes, of course. I mean, I have been busy too, but it's time we work as a team. Grace leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She couldn't tell if Philip was sincere or if he had simply realized she wouldn't let him take advantage of her anymore. But instead of answering, she smiled and said, let's see how things go. Actions speak louder than words. In the weeks that followed their dinner conversation, Grace noticed something different about Philip. He started paying closer attention to the little things. He began asking questions about her work and even visited her shop one afternoon, surprising her with lunch. Grace decided to observe his behavior quietly. One evening, Philip came home earlier than usual. He sat across from Grace, looking serious yet nervous. Grace, he began, I have been thinking a lot about us, about how I have treated you. You were right. I have been selfish. I got so used to you being independent that I didn't realize I was taking advantage of you. I want to make things right. Grace's heart softened, but she kept her composure. How do you plan to make things right, Philip? I want to be a better husband, he said. I have been saving up. Here, he said, pulling out an envelope and handing it to her. Grace opened it and found some money in it. "What's this for?" she asked. "It's my contribution to the house," Philip said. "From now on, we will split the responsibilities fairly. And more than that, I want to support your dreams the way you have supported me. You've been doing so much on your own, and I want to help." Grace was taken aback. For the first time since their marriage, Philip was showing genuine effort. "This is a good sign," she said, without being asked. He even suggested they open a joint savings account for future projects. What surprised Grace the most was how Philip started taking an active interest in her sewing business. One day, he brought home a sewing machine catalog. "I heard you have been needing an upgrade," he said. Touched, Grace hugged him. "Thank you, Philip. This means a lot." Their relationship began to transform. With Philip now sharing responsibilities, Grace found herself less burdened and more inspired to grow her business. Philip, on the other hand, discovered the joy of working as a team. One sunny afternoon, they stood outside Grace's shop, which now had a fresh new sign, "Grace and Philip's Creations." Together, they had decided to expand the business, offering tailoring and custom-made suits for men and women. As they watched customers come and go, Philip turned to Grace. "I'm proud of us," he said. Grace smiled. "Me too. I'm glad you decided to change, Philip. We are better together now." And from that day forward, their marriage was built not on secrets or selfishness, but on teamwork, respect, and love. The end. Please do well to subscribe to my YouTube channel, like and share this video. Thank you.